I'm Joe Rockey, and before we begin this episode of Father and Joe, I invite everyone to give us some feedback. In episode 383 and 384, we gave specific drills that you can implement in your life. What we are asking is, can you give us feedback upon implementing them and sending us the results to fatherandjoe@gmail.com. Thank you very much. And here is this upcoming episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, today want to talk about something that has been a pretty consistently surveyed result of Americans. And I get that we just had the election and surveys aren't exactly something people want to hear about, but this is about a different topic. This is not politics. But I would argue it's a much more important issue. And what it is that consistently now, when surveyed, your average American responds disfavorably about the interest and desire to see their family. Particularly talking about the relationship of adults with adults. So parents and their adult children and however that connection looks. And it is a consistent finding, if you will, that this keeps getting reported, that people are essentially breaking away and chipping away at their own family units. And there's a lot of negative things that come from that. And I want to have a conversation with you about what can we do about this to try to make it so that, you know what, I don't have a disfavorable thought about going to see my family for the holidays or just for a random Tuesday. So that's kind of what I wanted to address here now that has popped over the 50% mark.
Wow, that's pretty striking. That's been my sense. I've said things about it, but I haven't seen actual data. So that's really interesting to hear that there's such a significant disintegration of the family. And it's it's hard work. I think families have always been hard. I don't think that's new. But somehow there was more social glue holding things together that kind of forced us to figure out how to be with, like, crazy Uncle Jack, or our uh, isolated Aunt Matilda, or whoever it was. No offense to Jacks or Matildas out there, but uh, you know, I saw my dad do this. I'm a victim and a culprit of all the same dynamics. So I just need to out myself up front, and any suggestions or ideas that I have are things that I also need to apply to my own life. But I really saw my dad holding together. My great aunt, his aunt, was a hard person, and he stayed faithful to her. She accused him of things and cut him out of things and pushed him away so many times, and he just patiently stuck with her and took care of her to the end. And that was a great witness for me. Certainly took care of his own parents as well. Drove regularly 4 hours to be with my grandmother and to support her in the various processes of transition as she moved into her 80s and then in her 90s, and then lost her husband, my grandfather, and my dad was there. And I'd asked him sometimes, why do you do this? Well, because it's family. That was the only reason he needed, and that was plenty for him to endure things that were pretty painful, that were a lot of sacrifice. And I didn't develop the same conviction as he did. I like to think I will do that for my family members if the time comes, although my commitments are also a little divided because of my commitment to my monastic family. And I think that's part of what happens to people. You have your own family now, and I think you live close to both sides of your family. Your wife's family and your family live in the area more or less, I think. And
Yeah.
so it's not impossible for you all to do things together. It gets more complicated when people move away and there's a great distance between families. And then where do you have Christmas? And you want to have your own Christmas, but you also want to visit your relatives and they live halfway across the country. And then it was their decision to move. And so, then are you supposed to make all kinds of sacrifices and force your family to do that because your parents decided to move to Arizona because they don't like the winters in Pennsylvania, and those are all real questions and real struggles. So I say that with a lot of compassion and reverence for the real challenges that people have. And it's a real effort to hold together. And then it's easy enough to justify, why family? What difference does that make? Just because you happen to be born into a relationship or you share some DNA, why should they get special treatment? What is that about? And why should I make sacrifices for them when I cut out my friends, or I have my own immediate family that has their own needs? And why do I justify that? And those are also fair questions. Not to mention the fact when there are elements of abuse, or there were other wedges that were driven into those family relationships, and then those things are hard to overcome. And then it's just easy to write people off and say, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to reconcile that. This is not a priority to me, and I don't know why it needs to be. And those things are all out there. So how do we turn those things around is requires some conviction. I think we would say that the more that we can overcome the divisions and the more that we can build relationships, the more that we are going to grow in holiness ourselves, the more that our society can begin to heal, the more that we can move forward together towards a brighter future. We can't do it alone. We do need others. And we really need the diversity that others provide. And we have a lot of common ground with family, generally speaking, and we've got a lot of investment there. And so having some commitment, some investment in those relationships certainly makes a lot of sense towards rebuilding our world according to good principles. There are reasons that people separate, and I know cases where there is real abuse, and it might be physical or sexual abuse. That becomes very clear and probably requires criminal action, depending on how recent it was. But also elements of emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, verbal abuse that may not have criminal elements attached, and maybe a degree harder to identify, especially if it's something we grew up in, but where there may need to be a real separation. Boundaries there can be important if there's ever going to be a unity eventually. So some of that does get a little bit subtle, and I want to certainly recognize that. But maybe I'll just pause there and let you give a little bit of feedback. Just saying it is hard. It can be very hard, and it takes a real conscious effort to go back towards each other rather than just let things spin apart.
Yeah, so a lot of thoughts that came out of there. First is that you, as you mentioned in the beginning, families have never been easy. But one of the thoughts that I have is that, as you said, it's easier to write people off now, and you write off someone else in your life, a former coworker or former boss or whatever. No one ever cares. No one keeps track of that because they're just out of your life. But with family, it's different because they're your family. So there's a recognition that this is a different and a special relationship. And it makes me wonder, and this is an out loud question, maybe even off topic, so I apologize if it goes the wrong way. You certainly gave a lot of things that are legitimate reasons why you would not want to be with someone in that situation. But I have the same question that was studied. It's not even bothered to study anymore, but it was studied back in the late 90s when pharmaceutical companies really got the green light to advertise like crazy. And it was, does the advertising make people feel that they are sicker than they were? And it was pretty much unanimous yes. Now people feel like they are sicker than they were than the reality is. And it makes me wonder if, knowing how the human brain takes memories, it's not a recording equipment. It's not like taking your phone out and go, this is what happened. I saw him throw a strike and here's proof. Like, that's not how your brain works. Your brain remembers feelings, and which are not always accurate. It's not a recording equipment. That's not how memories are built. And with this extra societal influence of wanting to have status points for being a victim, pretty much unanimous, does this inflate problems more that weren't really there? So I just look at two things that are true with the human brain. I wonder that as just an outline question, because it doesn't get away from the core, which is, I'm not denying that bad stuff happens. Just like in the pharmacy world, I'm not denying that people get tuberculosis and they need pills. I'm not fighting that. But what I am saying is that it wasn't a random jump that just said, because now I see commercials for it, now the disease became more prevalent, because it didn't. So there is a building up of, there was problems, disasters, whatever, that might not be in reality. And the other part of it is, given that we're talking about relationships here at the end of the day, you can't have a successful relationship if one side wants out. So going full circle here, it takes effort, it takes commitment to want to try to be together and do it. Sure, you outlined some of the geographical things. Flying across 3 time zones is an issue. For some people, it's an issue driving 20 minutes, which is outstanding to me, but there are people that are like that. And coming up with a better answer than get over it, how do we go and actually make these boundaries correct, make it so that we want to be with each other, even if there has been, problems conceived or otherwise in our past?
Yeah. Well, what motivates us? So working with internal motivations. Obviously, you and I are having this podcast, and presumably people are tuning into it because we're Catholic and are trying to speak the truth that has been entrusted to the Catholic Church to proclaim. And so, if I can lean on Catholic motivations, the heaven consists of a perfect communion of love between all persons, and that includes the people that you've canceled in your life. And
Mhm.
one has to ask the real question: what's it going to take? You're not going to avoid these relationships forever. So we're going to have to work it out. That's going to be on both sides. It's not a one-way street by any means. But when are we going to work out these relationships? It has to happen between here and heaven. So if there's a place to work that out sooner rather than later, that's going to help us to grow in holiness. That's going to help the relationship to heal. And that's going to be evangelizing in some way for the other person. So um, that can be a motivation that helps us to do the hard thing. And then, what are we afraid of? I think that's the other thing to look at. What am I avoiding? What am I afraid of? And maybe I'm afraid that it's going to take up all of my time. Uh, Maybe I'm afraid that I'm going to make efforts and they're going to be rejected or they're going to fall flat. Maybe I'm afraid that uh, oh, I don't know. It's going to challenge me or expose some other area in my heart that I don't want to face. Well, we can be certain that no uh, act of love is lost. So this life really consists in making acts of love in one form or another. Anything that we do out of love lasts forever. And as the Teresas tell us, each in their own way. It's not about doing extraordinary things, it's about doing ordinary things with extraordinary love. So, being able to pour more love into some of these relationships is what we're made for. So, that can be a motivation. We can be motivated by the good of the other. It's not good for them to be cut off either. And if there's something that we can do to heal a relationship or help it to grow, um, and we might discover that there's a misunderstanding there that we can clarify. We might learn that part of it is our issue, which is a real problem and is might be impacting other relationships. If I actually uh, press into my relationship with you and we start to work things out, I may realize, oh, well, my stubborn pride or my miscommunication or my um, energetic defending of certain things or my um, demurring or fawning, that these are causing problems in our relationship. And look, that actually causes problems in other relationships. In fact, I see there's a whole pattern here of me withdrawing myself from relationships for this reason that I didn't understand until I tried to work out our relationship. So if we actually work on these relationships with family, that may help to expose something in my heart, might even expose something older. One of the things with family is we have a whole history, and we may discover that there are patterns that we reinforced with each other and taken for granted, and then those patterns reemerge in other relationships and have a kind of problematic quality to them. I know in my
Mhm.
own family, our the mode of Hicks communication is picking a point and fighting over it, making up evidence as necessary, and that doesn't really work out with most people. It's some form of bonding among the Hicks men in particular, and it's not great. It really could stand some conversion. But then seeing how I do that with my family, then suddenly I understand how that comes out as a defense in some other situations, and I shut people down or I overrun people with the same behavior. So, anyway, our families can really reveal our own hearts and can be an occasion of a lot of growth for us. There can be an evangelizing element that maybe my family member has that kind of behavior and doesn't know it. And who else is going to say it to him? Think of your favorite person that's hurting everybody, and you wish that somebody would tell that person, but you don't feel close enough to them. Well, who is close enough to them? Well, how about a family member? Wouldn't it be nice if we actually addressed family members about some of the things that are, you know, uh, off-putting or destructive in other relationships? So those are a few motivations. Do it for Jesus' sake.
Mhm.
Do it for your own sake. Do it for the other person's sake.
And two images came to me, one of which you've given me, and this has always stuck with me. And this would go under the motivation for yourself. And I think this will elaborate into the larger point I'm trying to make is that we know when we're supposed to do something, whether it be procrastinating on a final exam or doing homework or a project, or whether it be, whatever the thing is, we know our brains internally know what we're supposed to do. Not to say we don't forget things, it's not Google Calendar, but the point is we know and remember things. And our brain also is very good at making judgments for better or worse. When it's like, did I actually do what I was supposed to do? And the analogy that you've given before is a really clear image I see in my mind is that the more relationships that you have that aren't the way that they should be, and your mind knows how to define that, knows what it is, they're like anchors holding you back. And that's one of the things that really has always stood out to me. The other analogy I thought of here is as you were talking about how our relationship patterns don't just stay in this bucket. The thought that I had is if you've ever made icing in a different color, it starts all white and then you drop in a couple of food coloring colors and you swirl it around, and gradually the whole thing becomes the green color that you made the food dye in. All right, so that's one relationship. Then you don't have the ability to then put different drops of different colors for other relationships in there without it affecting that green you already made. So now it's going to become a different combination of colors. And that's the way it is. You can't have incredibly negative relationships in one side of your life and consistently be amazing in another. That's just not the way that your brain is. It will mix all of those colors and relationships to where you're at, hence raising the importance of fixing the closest relationships you have now, and that your brain identifies as, I really should talk to this person, or I really should put the effort out. And as you said, it might be scary, it might be vulnerable. I might get rejected. In all probability, especially if you're adults, you don't remember the childhood the same way as the other people involved in it. It's the way your brain is. So actually talking about it, if there are elephants in the room, addressing them, and it's amazing how much your life gets better by talking about something that probably isn't even perceived the same way as the other person. And there's a chance the other person doesn't even view it as a problem if they remember it at all. So I invite to not look at going to see your holidays and seeing your family as a burden, but to look at it as an opportunity to try to correct some of these things that are gnawing on you in the back of your mind. And to pat our own backs here, to put a comment on what Father said before, is we know there's a lot of you listening. There's more of you listening than can fill an NFL stadium. So we greatly appreciate all of the audience here and being with us. And if you haven't already, please share us with someone who would benefit from this. Use this episode as an invitation to maybe one of your other family members to, maybe we should go to mom's this year. Maybe we should go and do this and come with a little bit of an open mindset rather than just dwelling upon whatever conceived negative element there is. So we thank all of you for listening. We hope you have a great holiday, and we will see you here next week.